Hello and welcome to this special telecast. India is all set to welcome the most ambitious tax reform. That's the goods and services tax. We've been waiting for it for almost 10 years and finally looks like it will be a reality soon. What's going to be the impact of the goods and services tax on industry and the broader economy? We've got some of the finest minds of corporate India joining us to discuss that and more over the next 30 minutes. Let me introduce my panel. Naushad Forbes, President, CII, Vikram Kirloskar, Executive Vice Chairman at Toyota Kirloskar, Pawan Goenka, Executive Director at Eminent, and Chandrajit, Banerjee, Director General at CII. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us in this special telecast on ET Now. Mr. Forbes, I'm going to start off with you. Does it seem like it's finally now a done deal politically? Because we've talked about it for years now, but does it seem like we're nearing that elusive consensus and it should be a reality sometime this week?
Yes, I think the signs are very positive. I believe that we're closer to GST to happen this week than we've ever been in the past. And we've had a lot of engagement over the years, indeed, with the government of the day and with the opposition. And in recent meetings with the opposition as well, we've heard very positive sounds of how the opposition is working closely with the government on the detail of GST to ensure that we not only have the GST passed, but we have a good GST that is good for the economy, good for India, good for industry.
Mr. Goenka, is the upside of the goods and services tax a little overstated? You know, we've heard several leaders of industry say that we could see growth go up by 1% or 2%. Surely that's going to take a lot of time. Help us understand if you think the upside is overstated and by when will the benefits really kick in?
Let me put it this way, that the overall benefit that comes from GST perhaps is not even well understood by a common person. It is not so much about tax rates going down. That is just one part of it. The real upside to the industry comes from the fact that the whole tax governance becomes much simpler, much more transparent, much more stable. And the way we manage the business will not be to optimize tax, but to optimize the business performance. And therefore, we don't set up suppliers based on which one will be less tax. We don't set up warehouses. We don't set up plant based on tax. And therefore, the overall benefit that will come from the GST will be in these areas also. And therefore, I don't think the upside is being overstated. There is a lot of value to it that will come because the ease of doing business that would improve with GST, and that's one of the strongest point that I consider coming out of GST.
It's a fair point that you made, the fact that the way you look at your corporate India's approach to taxation will change because of transparency that GST will bring about. But Mr. Kirloskar, Mr. Goenka talked about the fact that ease of doing business will improve. And I hear that a lot from corporate India. If you could explain to our viewers in more simple terms, how do you see the ease of doing business improve once GST kicks in?
Well, you know, transparency is certainly going to make a big difference. I'm also hoping that the various tax rates which we have, especially in the car industry, from small car to big cars, will get reduced to only 1 or 2 rates, maybe a higher luxury rate and a lower standard rate, or better still would be one common rate. I'm sure the transparency is going to make a big difference. See, we keep looking at sometimes location, as Mr. Goenka explained, based on tax and other reasons, not really the core competitive reasons for locating suppliers and locating dealers. I think a lot of that will change. You'll find a more level footing for competition, a level ground across the country, and investments will go where there are skills, where there are natural resources, and where there's a desire to produce.
Mr. Forbes, how real do you think is the possibility of bringing the unorganized sector under the GST net as well? Because that's talked about as well, the fact that we have a lot of the unorganized sector that's not under the tax net, and with the introduction of GST, tax evasion will become very difficult.
Yes, that's very much part of the intention behind the GST. And we think that it will actually happen, because as it becomes, what is it that keeps the unorganized sector out of the tax net or keeps them wanting to stay out of the tax net? It's not just the fact that they have to pay a tax. It's also because of how tax gets administered and what returns, etc., they need to keep track of. If this all becomes simpler and easier to handle, then it becomes that much easier to include everyone in the tax chain. Just to comment on the earlier questions as well, the ease of doing business will improve in some very specific ways. Today when you as a company invoice your products, there are a whole range of taxes that you apply. There are excise taxes, there are sales taxes. Those sales taxes depend on whether you're selling within the state or whether you're selling out of the state. If you're selling out of the state, there's a central tax and then there's the local sales tax. So you have a whole bunch of different taxes that end up being applied. For example, on inputs, you have octroi. All of this just adds up to cascading, but it also adds up to a big burden on each company in terms of, for example, if you're supplying goods that are going to be used in subsequent manufacture, then you can supply those goods at present at a concessional tax rate. This requires you to collect a form from your end customer, and if you don't collect the form, which comes usually a year or two out, you don't collect that form, then that concessional tax rate is no longer applicable and you have to reverse it. It's all a cumbersome, detailed, painful process. And all of this will go away with GST. So that's an immediate benefit that all companies will see, a significant simplification in how tax gets administered on the ground. The great benefits, though, will be exactly as Pawan and Vikram mentioned just now. The great benefits will be when companies start locating plants and warehouses on the basis of what makes economic sense instead of for purposes of tax arbitrage.
Mr. Banerjee, what does the GST-induced inflation do to rate cycle? Because that's one of the concerns as well. And I thought I'll throw this to you. The fact that the rollout of GST could put some pressure on inflation. Do you see that happening? And what kind of an impact could that have on the rate cycle?
No, what's going to happen over a period of time, there will be some upward movement in the initial phase. But if you really look at the entire growth cycle, we see that over a period of time that will get addressed very well. We ourselves are going to see at least about 1.5 to easily about 1.25, 1.5, even it can go up to 2 percentage point in terms of adding to the growth rate over a period of time. And that, given that, we see that over a period of time you will see the price rise or the inflation that you are worried about getting completely addressed. It could be a spike in the beginning, but that settles down over a period of time. So in the long run, I think with the tax system becoming much more efficient, with the efficiency coming in, with India becoming one unified market, obviously there would be a downward pressure as one sees as far price is concerned. So it's going to be as we roll out, it's going to be something. It's going to be very interesting, if one can say, and we are going to see definitely it becoming much easier. And I don't see this concern over inflation, and it's sometimes a little hyped up. And I think that's as we come closer to GST, that is getting much more understood. That if at all there would be spikes of inflation or spikes of price rises, it's absolutely in the initial stage for a little while.
Mr. Goenka, would you agree with that view that the near-term impact of a marginal spike in inflation is all that we could see, and over a period of time it will kind of sort of balance out? And is corporate India worried about that near-term spike? Because obviously India Inc. is expecting a reversal in the rate cycle and expecting more sharp rate cuts going forward through this fiscal year as well.
I think so, because as Chandrajit said, that the inflation worries, if at all, and I'm not even sure that there will be a short-term impact, but even if there is, it will be a short-term impact, because after all, the total tax collected by the government of India, including states, will be about same as what it is today. So certain goods and services will become more expensive, certain goods and services will become less expensive, but overall weighted average should remain about the same, and therefore I don't think there will be inflation. I think the important point that Chandrajit mentioned, which is India becoming a single market. That's the biggest benefit that I see is India becoming a single market and ease of doing business. And these two things is what are what the corporate India is waiting for.
This 1.5 to 2% upside that Mr. Banerjee spoke about. Mr. Kirloskar, when do we see that coming through? Is that something that we will have to keep waiting for years, or do you see that coming through, that visible upside, so to see, in a couple of years after the rollout of GST as well?
I'm having trouble hearing you clearly, but I think I'm answering your question. There are two things which I find very important with GST that will happen. One is on the political side. It has been great to see all the political parties come together on a common platform and work at getting this bill passed, which means there's been a lot of discussion between political parties, and that is excellent. And that, I think that's a good thing between the states, political parties, finance minister. The second thing, if you look at my company, we take probably 6 days to get material from Delhi to Bangalore. I get material besides from within Bangalore. I buy from auto hubs in Delhi, in around Pune and around Chennai. I expect the time difference of material coming down to come down by 15-20% because of the stops on the way would be reduced. I expect to see the whole country, especially manufacturing, getting more competitive. This is a big plus for Make in India.
Big plus for Make in India as well. That's something I want to talk about, but I also want to get down to the specifics of the Constitutional Amendment Bill that will be, of course, taken up by the Rajya Sabha. Mr. Forbes, how significant is the move to drop that 1% additional levy from the GST Constitutional Amendment Bill? I know CII was also not in favor of that 1% additional levy because of the cascading impact that it would have. Are you happy that it's now out of the bill?
We are indeed. It's been our position right from the beginning that the moment you have any taxes that can cascade, that are not fully offset, you end up diluting the entire purpose behind GST. So it's a very good thing that that 1% tax has now been dropped. And I think all credit to both the government and the opposition for working together to make sure that happens.
Mr. Banerjee, cap on GST rates, that's a compromise seems to have been worked between the government and the opposition. We're still waiting more clarity on the nature of the compromise, but what we've been given to understand is that the cap is now not in the Constitution, but there will be some sort of a ring fencing that will happen in the GST bill per se. What is your own view on the cap? Because many believe that GST is an indirect tax, and so what's wrong in having a cap on the GST rates in the Constitutional Amendment Bill? What is your view on that?
So we have been consistently saying that the cap should not be in the Constitution, and it's not fair to have it in the Constitution, and probably it's not even correct to have it in the Constitution. And in our position that we had taken and the discussions that we have had with the government as well as across the political spectrum, that has been what we have been asking for, that let it be, and we have been talking to all political parties. We have been mentioning that the cap should not be in the Constitution. So we have been one sees that we have been able to make a lot of progress on that, and today the cap coming into the bill and the position of the principal opposition party being that let it be in the bill but not in the Constitution itself, we look at as to be a good and a good move from the position that was emerging earlier, and so that makes matters much easier for us to move towards convergence in ideas, and therefore we see GST really getting passed through this week.
Sure. Mr. Goenka, the most contentious issue now is of rates. I mean, even as we celebrate the progress that's been made politically on the goods and services tax, the big issue is going to be rates because, a very high rate could make it a non-starter. We're hearing some noises politically from state governments that they'd like the rate to be, the revenue neutral rate to be upwards of 20%, which is, of course, in variance with what the Arvind Subramanian panel recommended. Is that a key concern for India Inc. now, that we need to get the rate right as well?
Well, of course, it's important to get the rates right, but it will be driven by many considerations, one of which obviously is to ensure that the government of India has enough revenue for its own share and the share of states. My take is that the standard rate would be somewhere between 18 and 20%. I would be very surprised and perhaps a little bit concerned if it goes beyond 20%. My guess is that a lower rate could be around 12%. And a higher rate even though 40 is being talked about, in my view 40 is way too high, and probably a higher rate could be about 28% or thereabouts. And that's the kind of my sort of sense, 18-20 standard plus 8 and minus 8.
18-20 standard plus 8 minus 8. Mr. Kirloskar, does that broadly work for you as well, having a revenue neutral rate in the range of 18 to at the most 20%? And would you agree with Mr. Goenka that anything upwards of 20% could be a serious issue of concern? Because just the other week we had the J&K Finance Minister, Mr. Hasib Drabu, on ET Now make a case, strong case for a revenue neutral rate upwards of 20%. He was talking more in lines of 22%. So would you say that it's critical that we get it under 20% to start with?
You know, sorry, is this to me? I don't think the rate is such a big issue for me. I think the variety of rates is a bigger issue. I hope there are not too many varieties of rates, especially in our industry, in the auto industry, that we have 3-4 different rates. Already it's a big problem. I think a revenue neutral rate, whatever it is, would be ideal, even if it's 18-20%. But I hope there are not too many differential rates on top of that.
Mr. Forbes, what is the CII's view on this as well? Would you like the rates to be south of 20%? 16% is what 16 to 18% is what the CEA panel seemed to have recommended. Are you happier with that? And what's the upper limit that you're broadly comfortable with?
Well, we would welcome the rate that was mentioned by the Arvind Subramaniam Committee report of 18%. We think that's a rate that we can work with in industry. And we think it's a rate that will actually provide fair buoyancy in tax revenues as well. You know, I think one of the things about tax rates and tax administration is that one shouldn't look at it as a steady state problem. One should also look at what impact a much more easy rate actually implies, and how removing exemptions can lead to greater revenue even at lower rates. If you look at the Chinese example, when they introduced their unified goods and services tax, now over 10 years ago, I think 12 or 14 years ago, they had a tax to GDP ratio that was very similar to India's is today. Around 10 to 11% of GDP is our tax to GDP ratio today. They went from a tax to GDP ratio of 10 to 11% to a tax to GDP ratio that I believe now runs at around 18 or 19%. So they almost doubled their tax to GDP ratio by bringing in a unified goods and services tax with no exemptions. We should do the same thing. We can have a modest rate of tax, and if we ensure fewer and fewer exemptions, and indeed over time no exemptions, if we ensure no cascading of taxes, we can actually end up with a win-win, where industry benefits from lower taxes, consumers benefit because they're paying a lower tax and therefore pay less for their goods, and the government benefits and the country benefits from more buoyant and higher tax revenues. It really can end up being a win-win at a modest rate of tax, and we think somewhere in the 16 to 18% range would actually deliver that. The important thing will be to deliver it with no exemptions over time.
18% is a rate that industry can work with. Mr. Banerjee, as part of a compromise that was struck between the centre and the states, the government did agree to compensate states for revenue loss for up to 5 years. Is that too big a commitment? You think what kind of an implication could that potentially have?
See, I think it's not too big a commitment, and I think it's necessary for the government to give that confidence to the states. But what's going to happen is with us moving towards a more perfect regime of tax architecture, we would over a period of time, and with the collections improving, we will see, and with the GDP growing at a much greater rate, we would see that the time frame, that this 5-year time frame will be much lesser. It would definitely be because the 5-year time frame in terms of the need to compensate, because states' revenues will go up over a period of time. The consuming states versus the manufacturing states would, with the improvement of GDP, etc., one would see that revenues in the states itself will shore up. So one is not concerned about that. In fact, it's a good thing that the government has done by assuring that 5% window that they have given of compensating, because one is quite quite confident that with a perfect tax structure, with a much improved tax ecosystem, and with the GDP growing up, the states can be rest assured that their revenues would also increase.
Right. This compromise notwithstanding, even in the basic draft of the GST, as we are seeing with the kind of items that have been kept out of the GST net, it's an imperfect GST, Mr. Goenka. This is nowhere close to the perfect GST because several key items that constitute a large chunk of revenue for state governments have been kept out of the tax net. But are you okay with the fact that we're rolling out an imperfect GST to start with? Do you think that's better than an even more delayed GST?
Well, sometimes if we wait for perfection, we miss the bus. I think if we keep waiting for everything to be absolutely perfect, GST will never get implemented. Right now, we are at a point where most of what matters has been taken care of. Yes, there are a few exceptions, and over time, as Naushad said, as Vikram said, we should get rid of these exemptions as quickly as we can. But let's get started. Let's get started. Once the states start seeing the positive benefit that's going to come out of GST, perhaps the opposition to some of these exceptions will go away, and we will get everything unified. So I'm not going to be too worried about few things that one has to do to compromise. After all, there are many players who are coming together to make this happen. All the states, all the opposition parties, ruling party, and to get everybody aligned to something which is perfect is going to be almost impossible. So therefore, I won't worry about it too much. Yes, always nice to have perfect things, but things are never perfect in life.
It's never perfect in life. But Mr. Forbes, in your conversation with political leaders across the spectrum, what's the sense that you get? Are you hopeful that we will see some of these exemptions getting kind of ruled out? Do you see them getting a part of, especially alcohol, petroleum and tobacco as well? Do you see them being a part of the GST net, and how soon could that potentially happen?
I do see it moving forward over time. A lot depends on the individual states. I think what you would find in many of those areas, there are specific states that have concerns for particular commodities, and I think over time, as they themselves experience the benefits of GST, as they see their own revenues growing in a buoyant way, I think they will themselves get more comfortable state by state that by bringing everything into the GST, they will actually benefit and the country benefits. So I think we will see this move forward. In terms of what time frame, I would be very confident that we will start seeing the first moves for including more things in GST within a 1 or 2 year period. I think I would expect it to be an ongoing and fairly quick process to include more and more in the GST basket. Just to add to Pawan's point, there's a saying that says the saying is the perfect is the enemy of the good. I think we should start exactly as he said. We start with good, we'll make it perfect over time.
I think let me get closing comments from all my panelists because I saved the most important question for the last. You spoke about time frame, and I know we're celebrating the progress that's been made, but most importantly, we still don't know when is the rollout of GST going to happen. Mr. Kirloskar, you want to stick your neck out April 1, 2017. Does it look feasible, or is that looking too ambitious?
It's been like waiting for Godot by Samuel Beckett for so many years. I certainly hope this gets done fast and we move ahead. It's going to benefit the manufacturing industry greatly. It's going to put a level playing field across all our various suppliers, and I think it's going to encourage investment in manufacturing. I'm really looking forward to it as happening as fast as possible. Let all the political parties, the states all get together and see that this is a good thing. And we start with something, it'll improve over time.
But you're not sticking your neck out on that April 1, 2017 deadline. But Mr. Banerjee, let me throw it to you. I'm sure the CII, you've had a more granular look at all that needs to be done from now up until the rollout of GST, both in terms of the IT infrastructure, the kind of legislative approvals we'll need at the state governments. What's your sense? Is April 1, 2017 a workable deadline?
Yes, very much. In fact, just a few days back, we were discussing this within CII, and we felt that it's important for us to create a deadline, and this deadline of 2017 April is an important deadline. As you know very well, that GST could be introduced any time. Once moment it is passed, we can introduce it seamlessly at any point in time. Therefore, a 2017 sort of a mid-2017 deadline is important, and it is important from the point of view that we calculate backwards. And when we were calculating backwards, we felt that corporate India would definitely be in a position. We have seen the Government of India architecture that's also pretty much geared up to be ready by then for administration of GST, and so are most states. And what is required is for us to work together to see that wherever these gaps exist today are made ready. But if we don't have a deadline, we shall never achieve. So it's good to achieve, it's good to have a target, it's good to work with a deadline, and we will and work towards bringing in GST by 2017.
In fact, I was just going to ask that to you, Mr. Goenka. Having seen so many deadlines elapse over the years as far as GST is concerned, does a deadline matter at all for corporate India, or do you think we should stick it, put a deadline out there and put pressure on the governments and the state governments as well to ensure that it comes through?
My take is that if it didn't happen by April 17, it won't happen in the current government because the government will not risk something as new and as far-reaching as this in the last 2 years of its power. So therefore, it becomes almost a must that it happen by April 2017, because then I'm afraid if it doesn't, it will get pushed to perhaps next government. I'm worried about that. I think it's very doable if it gets passed next week in the monsoon session of Parliament. The rest of it, the states are ready, they will pass it. The government machinery seems to be ready. I have talked to several people and they are working day and night to get ready to implement GST. And even when it's implemented, will everything work on day one? Perhaps not, but it doesn't matter. I think we are good at fixing problems very quickly once we roll something out. So let's not even worry about having done all the perfect things in terms of all the processes, all documentation, this and that. Let's go ahead with it, roll it out, we'll fix the problem and move on. And the government, the industry, the consumers have to work together to make a success out of it.
Last word to you, Mr. Forbes. Are you sticking your neck out on April 1, 2017? Will it happen?
Very, very much so. 1st of April 2017 is entirely doable, and it's the date that we would expect. I mean, just to remind us that we've been talking about GST. Actually, I think it was first talked about when Jaswant Singh was the finance minister. So that goes back to about 2003. So we've had 13 years to think about it, 13 years to prepare for it. 1st of April 2017 is a perfectly fine deadline.
Let's hope it happens. We live in hope, and I'm so happy to see corporate India optimistic on the rollout of the goods and services tax, and of course on the impact that it will have on the broader economy. Mr. Forbes, Mr. Banerjee, Mr. Kirloskar, Mr. Goenka, thank you so much for sparing time and joining us in this special telecast right here on ET Now. Thanks for watching.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/ETNow, and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at ETNowLive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/user/ETNow.